Ooh, so March is gone. It is crazy to think that 2018's progress bar is already over 25% filled. We're done with the first quarter of the year. I hope it has been a successful one for you. This past month has been an absolute rush. I didn't get an episode out last week because I was focused in the salon with my team. We had meetings all week going over performance from March and the first quarter of the year. And so that is always my priority number one. And so podcast had to wait a week. But Chicago, of course, where I'm located, where our salons are, I've grown up here my whole life. It is definitely one of the things that inspires me the most. Now, I'm not the individual that's ever been able to look at something and see a building and think, oh, that could be a haircut, or be able to take things like that. But I love being able to take lessons and parables and things, I guess you could call them a parable. But looking at like the history and the design and just trying to reinvent the concept. And so I just wanted to share a few of the things that I find the most inspiring about Chicago. My favorite building in the city is the Sears Tower. Now, I know that it's currently called the Willis Tower, and they might sell the naming rights to that, but true Chicagoans know that that is the Sears Tower. Now, Sears as a company is probably not that inspiring. Maybe it was back in the day, but in its current form, I don't think it's that inspiring. I don't even know if it's even still around, actually. But anyway, the Sears Tower, it's the tallest building in Chicago. It's 110 stories, and it was the tallest building in the world for quite some time. I think from completion date was in the early 70s through 1998. It was the tallest building in the world. And it was still the tallest in the country up until a few years ago when New York beat it with the Freedom Tower, and then they have another one, I think, on Park West. But what is interesting about the Sears Tower is that it's actually composed of 9 different towers. And the design sort of has these step backs at certain points. Depending on how you're listening or watching this podcast, I'll put some images in the show notes so that you can check out and see what I'm talking about. But the design itself establishes that these 9 separate towers, while some of them would on their own be the tallest in the city, they can't stand on their own. They are too tall and too thin to be structurally sound. They need the other 8 towers in order to be as tall as they are. And I find that to be an amazing analogy for teamwork. And I don't know if it's all creative fields or what, but I think sometimes we can become so good at what we do, and you see this all the time, that people think that they're so good at what they do that they don't need anybody else to help them. And you might be extremely talented, but the reality is that you need people to support you. And so every time I look at that building, I go through this sort of analogy of teamwork, that those 9 towers on their own could not be the tallest building in the world, because none of them have the strength or the ability to do it on their own. They need the other 8. And so in the salon, when we have our rock star stylists, or we have our proteges, we have our front desk, our reservations team, like everybody is there to support each other, because without that support, we cannot create the experience, we cannot create the business, we cannot be as successful as we want to be without each other. Chicago is also a man-made city. Now, obviously talking about the Sears Tower, that is a feat of engineering, but another feat of engineering is we at one point reversed the flow of the Chicago River. It used to flow out to the lake like most rivers do, and what they found was, because of the industry in the city, that was sending a lot of pollutants and garbage out to the lake, and that made it difficult to have clean drinking water. And so the Army Corps, I believe, came up and re-engineered sending the flow of the river back down the river as opposed to out to the lake. This was a huge deal because it had never been done before. But it's amazing to me that you can build what you want, whether it is the tallest building in the country, whether it's reversing the flow of the river. Most of our shoreline along Lake Michigan is actually man-made. It's not how it has naturally been formed. And so it inspires me to realize whatever it is you want to build, you can build it. Doesn't matter how tall it is, how big it is, how hard it might be. Doesn't matter if anybody has ever done it before. You can change the way that something works. You can change and make whatever it is that you want it to be. A little fun fact about that river flow is St. Louis was very upset that we had decided to send all of our garbage down to them. But they ended up suing the city, saying that you couldn't do that. They did not win that lawsuit, but in the end they did win because they took that river water, they bottled it, and they sent it and sold it back to us as Budweiser. So I love that joke. But the last one that really sticks out to me is really the core of how the city began. Now, Chicago, as we were growing in the mid 1800s, it was a good sized city, but it was not the major destination that it is today. St. Louis, actually, speaking of St. Louis, was a bigger city at the time. But in 1871, Chicago had a devastating fire, the Great Chicago Fire. Now, it was interesting because it leveled everything. And in the moment, I cannot imagine what it would be like to have the entire city burned to the ground. Yes, there were some buildings that survived, some neighborhoods that didn't get touched, but the main downtown district all burned to the ground. And so that is an incredible loss. And could you imagine just the devastation that that would cause? However, in hindsight, the Chicago fire was great, not just because of the size of the fire, but because of its ability to allow Chicago to rebuild itself. We were able to basically change everything that they had done wrong. Back then, there was no plan for how the city would grow or where industry would go or what the design was going to be. It was basically, put that over there, build this there, that'll be fine, that'll work, whatever. And so it allowed us to sort of hit the reset button on city development and city planning and say, look, if we're going to grow, if we are going to become the best city that we can be, we need to have a plan for how we're going to do it. And with that, Daniel Burnham was able to come up with something a couple of decades later. They put that into place. And I love the story because in any time that we have difficulty or we have a setback, whether it be a small setback or a major setback, like the entire city burning down, it's an opportunity for us to look and see what is going to be the fantastic outcome that we can make of this, right? How can we use this as a motivation to be bigger and better than what we were? And oftentimes, those setbacks can even blind us to the great things that are happening. Now, for us, I'll share two things with you. Personally, March was a really, really heavy month. Unfortunately, had a breakup. Didn't like that. We also had one of our stylists she's one of my favorites. She's also one of our fastest growing right now. Tell me that she's going to take a leave and, switch things up career-wise a little bit. So she's going to be leaving us. But at the same time, March was the first month that we've had as a company that we had a $200,000 month. That is amazing. And so while those two setbacks are big, and I could probably put them in the fire category, I know that we are still in a great position to be able to grow. And so, you might have a top stylist leave. You might lose a manager. It will be okay as long as you have a plan and develop something in order to grow and become bigger and better. And so the title for this episode, You Can't Stop the Go, it actually comes from a Nike billboard that's up by one of our salons. And I absolutely love the message. This is Chicago. We can build and do and make anything happen that we want to have happen. But the reality is, if you're listening to this and you're not in Chicago, you can do it too. if you're in LA, if you're in New York, if you're in smaller places like Detroit or Columbus or Phoenix, it doesn't matter. You can create your own go and nobody can stop you. So with that, I want you to go out there, live your successful lifestyle, and make it happen for yourself.